A wealthy landowner prepares for a long journey abroad and entrusts his estate to 3 of his servants. He doesn't give them equal amounts. He distributes his wealth according to what he knows each man is capable of managing. This wasn't a small test. A single talent was a unit of silver worth about 20 years of wages for a common laborer. Even the man who received the least was standing over a literal mountain of wealth. The first 2 servants start trading immediately, putting the silver to work. But the third man takes his talent, finds a remote spot, and buries it. To an ancient audience, this was actually a defensive maneuver. In a world with no digital banking, hiding treasure in the earth was a recognized and legal way to protect assets from theft or war. He kept the money safe. He didn't spend it on himself, he didn't lose it in deals, and he didn't gamble it away. When the master returns years later, the servant digs it up and presents every single coin, perfectly preserved. But the master's reaction is a shock. He doesn't thank the man for his caution. He calls him wicked and lazy and orders him to be thrown out of the house and into the darkness. This creates a jarring contradiction. Why does the master reserve his harshest judgment for the man who followed the safest possible path to ensure nothing was lost? The master's long absence wasn't an accident. It was the point. It created a window of time where the servants were free to act on what they truly believed about the man they served. The first 2 servants were incredibly productive because they saw their master as someone worth working for. They viewed him as generous and trusted that his absence was an opportunity, not a threat. That trust gave them the confidence to take risks. They knew the master's character, so they spent their years actively participating in his mission rather than just waiting for it to end. This chart reveals how the master measures success. The man who doubled 2 talents receives the exact same reward as the man who doubled 5. He isn't looking at who made the most money. He's looking at who was most faithful with what they were given. In this economy, the master values the servant's willingness to participate in his work far more than the raw size of the return. The third servant's failure started long before he touched a shovel. When he faces the master, he admits he saw him as a hard man, someone who harvests where he didn't plant. Because he believed the master was harsh and demanding, his entire relationship with his work was defined by a fear of punishment. This flowchart tracks the breakdown. It begins with the assumption that the master is a threat. That belief generates fear. Any mistake becomes a catastrophe. Fear creates a false choice: risk everything or do nothing. He chose the whole to stay safe. But the master points out the inconsistency. If the servant really believed his master was that demanding, he should have at least put the money in the bank. Even a small amount of interest would have been better than a buried talent. The man was so focused on avoiding the risk of a mistake that he ensured the certainty of a failure. His crime wasn't that he lost the money, it was that he refused to use the authority he was given. He stepped out of the mission entirely. He tried to frame his inactivity as a necessary precaution. In reality, he used his master's reputation as a shield to justify his own refusal to get his hands dirty. The master reclaims the gift, taking the silver from the fearful servant and placing it into the hands of the one who will use it. This transfer reveals a pattern. Stewardship that is neglected is eventually withdrawn. The resources move toward the person who is actually willing to do the work. The 2 paths move in opposite directions. Faithfulness expands into more responsibility, while fear contracts until there is nothing left to hold on to. The faithful are invited to share in the master's own joy and closer relationship, while the one who withdrew is left exactly where he chose to be, on the outside. This suggests that unfaithfulness isn't always about a dramatic moral collapse. It isn't always a deliberate rebellion. It's often a hidden failure, a quiet decision to keep our lives safe and sterile because we've convinced ourselves that God is someone we need to hide from. We are currently in that same long time while the king is away. The question isn't how much we were given, but what we're doing with it. Are we burying our lives in the dirt, or are we joining the work?